The summit began with a conversation between Minister David Anderson and myself on the very day that the Toronto report on smog emissions hit the front pages of our community, announcing that 1,000 people per year were dying prematurely as a result of smog in the city of Toronto alone, with 5,500 hospital admissions. And I had been invited, and I appreciated the invitation, to a conversation with Minister Anderson that very evening, off the record, to talk about what we could be doing on air issues. And we explored the idea of getting together in a summit format on a very tight timeline. I mentioned that this was the first of a tri-level summit on smog, but it is important to remember that there have been efforts in the past on which we are really building. And those include, for example, the Blue Ribbon Clean Air Committee that Metro Council had with Councillor Joan King and others a few years back. And probably you have other examples of gatherings of this sort. It's not as though this is the first time people have met to talk about this problem. But I think that what's exciting about this initiative is that we have three levels of government agreeing to work together in a climate where it's all too easy to pass blame and responsibility back and forth and never necessarily take it. I think the spirit of this summit, which has been witnessed by what we've heard just before lunch, was that everybody here came here to take responsibility for doing something about the problem. And all of you are here willing to do that as well, as we heard in the announcements earlier. I just wanted to mention some of the things that the City of Toronto has been doing and is hoping to continue to do as we move forward, because there really are quite a number of smog busting initiatives, I think we can say, that have been adopted. First of all, the Better Buildings Partnership. You've heard a little bit about this, but I want to underline the revolutionary nature of this project. This is a project whose vision is encapsulated in the concept of trying to retrofit an entire city, top to bottom, for energy efficiency. And the achievement of that energy efficiency retrofit work entirely by energy savings in the future. In other words, you borrow money that you know you're going to get back because you're going to reduce your energy use, and you spend that money now on the retrofitting of buildings. It's turned out to be, and it came as an idea from the labor movement, trying to figure out how they could deal with the slump in construction that happens sometimes in the construction cycle. What can you do when new buildings aren't being built because of the ebb and flow of the economy? And one concept was, maybe we could go in and retrofit the buildings we've already built. And well, then how would you pay for it? Well, the notion was that if you could retrofit them in a way to save energy, you could pay for it out of that future energy saving stream. Now, you had to convince the financiers of this concept, and this has been an extremely difficult thing to do. Then you had to convince each building owner that it was a good idea. And Toronto has this Better Buildings Partnership precisely to get all of that organized. And it was seed funded by infrastructure money that came through TAF. And the neat thing about it is the City of Toronto still has that infrastructure money from that very first infrastructure program. It's still sitting in the bank earning interest and making money for Toronto. And we've levered from that about 15 times as much investment as we put out. It's really an astonishing thing. And now what we're hoping is that we can roll that out into a program right across the whole of Megacity. Council has endorsed that. And now we're working with our federal government colleagues, and I've been in discussions with Minister Martin, Minister Anderson, and the Prime Minister about this, and many members of Parliament who are familiar with it are advocating for it to create an even larger revolving fund in the future. We're thrilled to have the $125 million Green Municipal Investment and Green Municipal Enabling Funds to get these programs started in municipal buildings across the country. And it's a truly wonderful new partnership shaping up between cities and the federal government. Then we have the Toronto Renewable Energy Co-op. You've heard a lot about that one, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, except to say that ultimately we see, my own personal vision is a lot of windmills on the waterfront, but maybe more of them out in the water. the Danes have developed some technology for building stands to hold windmills up out in the water, where I think we might not have as much local concern, which you sometimes get whenever you want to put something new on the waterfront. But in addition, the sooner we can get those new windmills open, the sooner Torontonians are going to begin to get excited about the notion of renewable energy, because they'll be able to see it. And then we'll link up with windmills all across North America, hopefully, and buy power from them. Next is our Deep Lake Water Cooling Project. It's a huge undertaking, and I know many people were skeptical. Frankly, I was skeptical when I first heard about this. It sounded like a mega project to suck water out of the bottom of the lake. How could that be a good thing? And put it back in warm, take it out cold and put it in warm. That just sent off all the wrong signals to me as an ecologist. But guess what? It turned out, after we studied it in a great deal of depth, that we cool our buildings now in such an inefficient way that I'd like you to think about what happens. We burn coal at Lakeview at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to cool the buildings when they're at their absolute hottest. The sun has been blazing on them all day, people working inside, and we throw on the coal over at Lakeview, which of course contributes to global warming, meaning that we'll have more of this kind of cooling to do next year. But setting that aside, the Lakeview plant, not everybody knows this, is cooled by a massive amount of water being sucked in from the lake, run through the plant to keep it cool at a functional temperature, and it goes right back out in the lake, discharging huge amounts of heat. In addition, heat is exhausted through the stack. So, in fact, Lakeview is producing an enormous amount of heat. And if you think about it, these air conditioners are basically removing heat from inside a room and throwing it outside the building. But in addition, they're using electricity, which in and of itself, its very production involves taking cool water and throwing heat out into the atmosphere. It turns out that by bringing in deep lake water cooling, we will actually put significantly less heat into the lake than we are today. So we're actually going to cool the lake by using deep lake water cooling. I think that's cool, so to speak. I mean, these are the neat synergies that begin to emerge when you start thinking about doing things right. So this project is moving ahead. We are concerned because the initial plan was to put the pipe down to 75 meters, but we found that one of the effects of global warming is increased turbulence on the Earth's surface. That means higher waves. For example, wave amplitude worldwide is up 10% in the last 10 years. Think about that for a second. Sea level rise is one thing. But if you start adding to that wave amplitude magnification, then you've got a much bigger problem. Fortunately, we're not on the seacoast, and municipalities on the seacoasts are going to have some real challenges because of that. But anyway, what this does is it disturbs the limnography of the lake, which is the way in which the temperature gradients are found within the lake, and it means that we may have to go deeper to get that cold water with some degree of certainty. And so we're studying how exactly to do that right now. But this will be the single biggest mega project to reduce smog in Toronto by eliminating vast amounts of coal burning. So it's very, very exciting, and the loops to connect the buildings are already under construction. The Air Canada Centre and the Convention Centre are currently cooled by a common system, all drawing on this, what will ultimately base-loaded by the lake. Next, we have auto share. I hope you've heard about auto share. This is for people that occasionally need a car, but they don't always need to have a car. And what about if they could share a car? Many of us have thought that would be a useful thing to be able to arrange, but nobody really quite figured out how you would do it. You know, all the practical problems. Well, what about if I need a car and the other person needs it at the same time? Well, then the best way would be to have a group of people all sharing a group of cars. And then you minimize the chances that when you need one, you might not be able to get it. And you use computer technology for the registration of the times you might want to have it. And before you know it, you've got a functioning system where you may be able to reduce the total car ownership of a group by a significant amount. It's been done in Europe, and now it's being started here. Liz Reynolds and her wonderful team of people, with a little help from TAF and others, have got this rolling. And it can reduce pollution by 50% per rider, because the mere production of a car uses about the energy equivalent of 10 years of using that car. So that's a plus. Next is the walking school bus. This is my favorite climate change reduction photograph. You can't really see it. It's a bunch of kids walking to school. And instead of all these cars bringing their kids to school, because parents are concerned about safety And they're concerned about convenience and planning their schedules. And we were thrilled to get the announcement from the minister today that that whole school bus program from Greenest City is now going to be expanded with help from the federal government. So that's great. Go Transit. I don't really think I need to add much. You all know about Go Transit, how rapidly its demand is rising, and what we're doing at Union Station, again with the federal government on that one. Our anti-idling bylaw, the mayor spoke about it before, but I think we should also mention the mandatory monitoring and reporting initiative, so that you can find out what the factory next to you is emitting. And the fires we had recently in some of our industrial plants really highlighted the importance of the community's right to know. And the Environmental Task Force has embraced this and called on the city to develop a bylaw in that regard. Cleaner fuels, I think we were one of the first cities to actually tender our contract for gasoline and require the tenderers to tell us how much sulfur was in their gas. And as a result of that, we selected the lowest sulfur gas. And it was, by the way, very significantly lower than the highest one. And it was an exciting decision that council made because there was a cost to it. It wasn't much of a cost, actually, but there was a cost. But nonetheless, we buy a lot of gas for our vehicles. And so that's shaping the market, and that led us then to encourage and to endorse, our city council endorse the notion that that we should encourage all Torontonians to buy low sulfur gas, and or lower sulfur. We don't have any low sulfur gas yet here, but lower. Then there's our smog plan. We have to thank the Toronto Environmental Alliance for this, because they came to us a couple of years ago and said, you know, you guys need to have a plan at the city for when there's a smog alert. And they gave us a whole bunch of ideas as to what should go in it. Some of our staff, of course, could see some challenges to council adopting these things, but I think I'd like to salute both staff and the council, because the council decided to move ahead anyway, and the staff figured out how to make it happen. And it was really exciting. And so many other cities, we heard about Windsor copying some of those kinds of ideas. Then there's the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. I wish that every community had such a fund as this. We were lucky because we had the old Langstaff jail farm north of Toronto that we didn't need, and a developer wanted it back in the late 80s, and it was sold just at the time when the scientists got together in Toronto and found out and determined together that we were beginning to have the crisis of global warming. And CO2 went from being a colorless, odorless, harmless gas, which is what I was taught in grade 5 science, into being a potential species killer for humanity. That was a real shocker. And that conference raised the red flag for action and called for a 20% reduction in CO2 emissions. And the City of Toronto immediately adopted that as a target. It's been called the Toronto target ever since. Kyoto is much less ambitious than the Toronto target, and we're still shooting for the Toronto target, as is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for municipal operations. And then it said, let's take some of the money we're getting from selling this piece of property and put it in a permanent endowment in recognition of this problem and this challenge. And actually Phil Jessup and other people in the room, but I mentioned Phil only because he was on the committee that helped to develop the concept for this. This whole notion of a revolving fund that would produce interest that could be used for innovative projects and would loan money for energy retrofit work. So that happened. It was exciting, and in one of those nice developments in life, it turns out that Phil Jessup is now the executive director of the fund 10 years later. And we're launching the Clean Air Partnership today as a way of drawing in private money and charitable donations into that work so that we can multiply the impact of the TAF. And of course, we're using it as a model in with our colleagues at other levels, and other cities are now looking at how they can do it. Our goal, by the way, is to do things that were always said to be impossible to do together. Clean up the environment, create jobs, and do something good for the government bottom line. It used to be that if you did something right for the environment, it was going to cost jobs, not create jobs. And it was going to be expensive and cut down on profits, and plants would move, and so on and so forth. Well, this is one of the ideas predicated on the idea that you can find strategies to do all three at the same time. And virtually every project has been based on that. And then, of course, on to the Smog Summit, which we have today, which we think is a potentially a turning point in the way that we work on this issue. We hope it will be. We'll certainly be judged on whether it has been, as we should be.
Cops are watching us.